You hear them before you see them. Boots, hundreds of them moving through your street with the rhythm of a machine. You're pressed against the wall of what used to be your home, holding your breath, feeling the cold stone against your spine. The smoke outside is so thick you can taste it. Metal, burning wood. Something else you can't name. Your hands are shaking, and you're trying to remember your daughter's face, but the fear is eating every other thought. Then the door explodes inward. 3 men step through the smoke, and they don't need to say anything. You already know. This is the moment your life ends and something else begins. Something without a name. I'm always curious who's watching these stories from across the world. Drop a comment and let me know where you are. It amazes me every single time. This city died on a summer morning in 146 BC, not slowly, not with mercy. It died the way Rome killed everything that refused to kneel, with precision, with quotas, with lists. The place was Carthage, the greatest rival Rome had ever faced. For 3 years, Roman legions surrounded it, starving it, breaking it piece by piece, until the walls finally cracked. And when they did, what happened next wasn't chaos. It was a harvest. That's what the Roman military manuals called it. A harvest of human beings. 50,000 people processed in 6 days like crops pulled from a field. Half of them were women. But this isn't a story about war. It's about what came after. About the system Rome built to extract value from human suffering. About ships designed specifically to transport people. About markets where mothers were sold like furniture. And it's about one woman whose name was erased so thoroughly that we'll never know what her mother called her. But we know what happened to her. We know because Rome kept records of everything. Every body, every coin, every scream. Before dawn on the 7th day after the city fell, someone would make a choice that doomed thousands. A letter, written in ash and blood, would surface 200 years later. And the last person standing would be the one nobody expected. But to understand how it worked, we need to go back. Back to the moment when the screaming stopped. When the soldiers started counting. When 25,000 women learned they were no longer people. They were inventory. Her name was Safiya. At least, that's what she'd been called for 19 years. In 3 weeks, that name would be burned out of her memory, replaced with a Latin word that meant nothing. Third, property, thing. But right now, standing in the central square of Carthage, she still believed the worst was over. The fighting had stopped. The soldiers weren't killing anymore. She thought that meant survival. She was wrong. The Romans had set up tables in the square. Long wooden tables with scrolls, wax tablets, and men in clean tunics who looked like merchants, not soldiers. They were organizing something, processing people like they were counting sheep. Safiya watched a woman ahead of her get pulled to one of the tables. A man grabbed her jaw, turned her head left, then right, pried open her mouth to check her teeth, squeezed her arms, wrote something down. The woman was led away. Another was brought forward. Same process, same cold efficiency. The line moved steadily, and Safiya realized with growing horror that she was in a queue. They were being sorted. A Roman officer called her forward. His hands were rough, his examination mechanical. He counted her teeth. 28 checked her eyes for cloudiness. None felt the muscle in her shoulders and arms. Strong, healthy. He wrote 2 words on his tablet. Prima classis, first class. She didn't understand Latin, didn't know those words meant she was worth more. That they meant her suffering would last longer than the women marked 2nd or 3rd class. She only knew that when he finished, he nodded to a guard. And the guard tied her wrists with rope that cut into her skin immediately. Then they moved her to a different group, the premium group. But what happened next broke every rule she thought she knew. Safiya had a daughter, 4 years old. Dark curls, a laugh that sounded like bells. When the soldiers came, Safiya had hidden her in a grain storage pit beneath their home, covering the entrance with a rug. She thought if she stayed quiet, if she cooperated, they'd let her go back. She'd dig up her daughter, and they'd run. Find family in the countryside. Survive. That's what mothers do. They survive for their children. But 3 days after her capture, Safiya overheard 2 Roman soldiers talking near her holding pen. They were laughing about something. About children found hiding in homes. About basements and storage pits. One soldier made a joke about how many they'd found. Hundreds. The other asked what they did with them. The first one stopped laughing. He said they couldn't bring children back to Rome. Too much trouble, too expensive to feed during transport. So they handled it. Quickly. Efficiently, before loading the mothers onto ships. That way, the women would be compliant. Empty. Broken in a way that made them easier to control. The doctor who was supposed to save those children had killed them instead. On purpose. Under orders. Safiya stopped breathing. She remembered the moment they dragged her from her home. She looked back at the rug. Just once, hoping her daughter would stay silent, stay hidden. Stay safe. Now she understood. Her daughter had been found. And Safiya had been standing here for 3 days, tied to a post, believing her child was still alive. Believing there was something to go back to. There wasn't. There never had been. The harbor at Carthage smelled like the end of the world. Smoke mixed with salt water and human waste and fear. Safiya walked up a wooden plank onto a ship called Providentia. The name meant foresight. The irony was unbearable. Below deck, the air was thick enough to choke on. Sweat and unwashed bodies and the sharp smell of vomit. There were already 60 women crammed into a space designed for cargo, not people. But Rome had redesigned these ships specifically for this. Ventilation shafts ran through the hull to keep the merchandise breathing. Drainage channels carried waste to the sea. Water barrels were secured to the walls, rationed carefully to keep everyone alive but desperate. These ships were floating prisons. Engineering marvels of cruelty. Safiya found a spot against the wall. Next to her, a woman was rocking back and forth, muttering a prayer to Tanit, the goddess of Carthage. Another woman told her to stop. The Romans would punish them for praying to foreign gods. The woman kept praying anyway, for 3 days. Then she stopped eating. By day 7, she stopped moving. On day 9, they dragged her body up to the deck. Safiya heard the splash as they threw her overboard. No ceremony, no words, just the sound of a body hitting water, and then the creak of the ship moving forward again, like nothing had happened. Every morning, a sailor came down with 1 bucket of water and 1 sack of hard bread. It was never enough for 70 women, never close. So they fought for it, clawed at each other, screamed over scraps. That was the design. By creating scarcity, Rome created competition. Women who might have organized, who might have resisted together, were too busy surviving each other to think about the guards above deck, too exhausted to plan, too broken to hope. Safiya stopped trying to get water after the first week. She drank what others left behind, licked moisture from the walls when it rained. She lost track of days, lost track of herself, lost the will to remember her daughter's face. That was the goal. The ship wasn't just transportation. It was transformation. By the time they reached land, Safiya would be different, hollowed out, emptied of everything that made her who she was. And Rome would fill that emptiness with obedience, with fear, with the knowledge that resistance meant death and compliance meant survival. That calculation was the foundation of the entire system. It turned human beings into tools. 26 days after leaving Carthage, Safiya stepped off the ship at Ostia, weighing 30 pounds less than when she'd boarded. Her wrists were infected where the ropes had cut them. Her eyes were empty. She was alive, and being alive, she would learn, was the cruelest trick of all. The slave market at Ostia had a routine. Before auction, they cleaned you, oiled your skin to hide malnutrition. dressed you in a plain tunic that marked you as property. Then they burned everything you'd worn from home. Safiya watched her dress burn. The blue dress her mother had made for her wedding. The ashes floated up into the Roman sky, and she realized she was watching the last piece of Carthage disappear. It's the last piece of who she'd been. They gave her a new name that day, Tertia III, because she was the third slave purchased that week by a man named Marcus Tullius. He owned a textile workshop in Rome. He needed workers. She was a worker now. The first thing they did was shave her head, not as punishment, just procedure. New slaves arrived with lice sometimes. Easier to shave everyone than to check. Safiya's hair had been long, dark, thick. Her daughter used to play with it. She watched it fall to the stone floor in clumps, black against gray stone. And she felt something inside her break. Not violently, just quietly. Like a rope finally snapping after holding too much weight for too long. That night, she tried to remember her daughter's name. She couldn't. The word was gone, burned away like her dress, shaved away like her hair. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a mother. Now she couldn't even remember what she was mourning. Rome didn't just want obedient slaves. They wanted slaves who forgot they'd ever been anything else. So they built a system to erase memory itself. Language first. Safiya was forbidden from speaking Punic, punished if caught. Within months, her native tongue felt foreign in her mouth. Then religion. Her small amulet of Tanit was found and destroyed. She was told Roman gods protected this house now, that she would honor them or face consequences. So she learned to pray to gods she didn't believe in, learned to forget the ones she did, then the memories themselves. She was forbidden from talking about Carthage, about her husband, about her child. At first, she held those memories desperately, replayed them every night. But years passed, and remembering hurt more than forgetting. So she stopped. After 6 years in Rome, Tertia barely remembered the woman named Safiya. That person felt like a dream. A story someone had told her once about a city that no longer existed, about a girl who'd had a daughter. But sometimes, late at night, she'd wake up with the feeling she'd forgotten something important, something urgent. And she'd lie there in the dark, trying to remember what it was. But the answer never came. Only the feeling remained. An ache without a name. Grief without a face. In 1994, archaeologists excavating outside Rome discovered something that changed our understanding of Roman slavery forever. A mass grave containing the remains of 67 women, all between ages 14 and 30, all showing signs of malnutrition, bone stress, chronic infection. But it was the DNA analysis that revealed the truth. These women came from North Africa, the Levant, Hispania, Gaul. Different continents, different cultures. All buried together in an unmarked pit outside a textile factory. They'd found Tertia, or women like her, the invisible foundation of Rome's economy. The workers who made the cloth that dressed the senators, who died without names, who were buried without ceremony, who disappeared from history entirely. The grave also contained something else. Small clay tablets with marks scratched into them. At first, researchers thought they were accounting records, inventory lists, but when they analyzed the marks more carefully, they realized what they were looking at. Names written in Punic, in Aramaic, in Iberian scripts, scratched in secret, hidden in the clay before it dried. These women had written their real names, the names Rome tried to erase, and they'd hidden them where no one would ever find them. Except someone did. 2,000 years later, and now we know, Safiya existed. So did Adira, Yara, Balika, Naya, women whose names were supposed to vanish forever. They made sure they didn't. Rome couldn't stop. That's the part they don't teach you. The empire wasn't just built on slavery, it was addicted to it, structurally dependent in a way that made stopping impossible. At Rome's peak, 40% of the population in Italy were slaves. The fields that grew the grain to feed the legions ran on slave labor. The mines that produced silver to pay soldiers used slaves until they dropped dead. The aqueducts, the roads, the monuments, all built on disposable human bodies. Without a constant supply of new slaves, the entire system collapsed. And Rome knew it. So they kept conquering, kept destroying cities, kept feeding women into ships. Not out of cruelty, though there was plenty of that. Out of necessity. Every decade without a major war meant fewer slaves entering the market. Fewer slaves meant agricultural crisis. Agricultural crisis meant hungry soldiers. And hungry soldiers meant political instability. It was a machine that had to keep feeding or it would die. So Rome kept feeding it. Carthage, Corinth, Jerusalem, Numantia, hundreds of cities, hundreds of thousands of women, all processed through the same system, all reduced to numbers in a ledger, all forgotten. The addiction metaphor isn't poetic, it's structural reality. And when the conquests finally stopped in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, when the borders stabilized and new slaves stopped flowing in, Rome began to collapse. Not immediately, but inevitably. The terror Rome created changed everything. Communities across the Mediterranean built elaborate underground shelters to hide their women during raids. Some parents scarred their daughters' faces to make them less valuable. Marriage traditions changed to protect girls from Roman markets. When the city of Numantia fell in 133 BC, the surviving women didn't wait to be processed. They threw themselves from the walls, walked into burning buildings, chose fire over the ships. The Romans called it madness. But these women had heard the stories. They knew what waited in Ostia. Death was the only freedom Rome couldn't take away. That choice became a pattern. From Spain to Judea, women facing capture made the same calculation, not despair. Defiance. You're back where we started. Standing in that house, hearing the boots on the street. But now you know what those boots mean. Now you understand that the system behind them was designed by architects and economists, perfected over centuries, documented in manuals. The woman pressed against the wall isn't just afraid. She's standing at the threshold of erasure. Her name will be taken, her language forbidden. Her memories slowly hollowed out until she forgets her own daughter's face. And it will all be perfectly legal, perfectly normal, perfectly Roman. Safiya's story doesn't have a happy ending. Neither do the stories of the 24,999 other women processed with her. Most died before age 40, worn out by labor, disease, or heartbreak. Their names disappeared from every record, except for those clay tablets, hidden in graves, scratched in secret. Tiny acts of resistance that said, I was here. I had a name. I mattered. Even if no one remembers, I was real. Those tablets are in a museum now. You stand close enough, you can still see the marks. Still trace the names. Still feel the weight of what Rome tried to erase. The glory of Rome was built on this foundation. Every road, every aqueduct, every marble temple. All built on suffering that was never supposed to be remembered. But we remember now. We remember Safiya. We remember the ships. We remember the markets. We remember the 25,000. And we remember that civilization itself can become a machine for destroying human beings. The next time you see Roman engineering celebrated, remember what powered it. Remember the cost. Remember the names scratched in clay. And remember that history isn't always glorious. Sometimes it's just boots in the street. And the sound of a woman forgetting her own child's face.